Hey everyone, welcome to the Eat to Win show where sports nutrition meets peak performance. Get ready for expert insights, real stories, and tips to help you win with every meal. Let's dive in.
Hi, and welcome to the Eat to Win podcast. I'm Tavis Piatola, your host. We're here to talk about all things sports nutrition and how we help athletes win. Today, we're excited to welcome Kat Hammer. She's the Head Sports Dietitian at the University of Pennsylvania and owner of Hammer Fuel Sports Nutrition. She's a former collegiate athlete herself. She understands the unique challenges that student athletes face and specializes in providing simple, effective nutrition strategies to help them succeed. So let's dive into her insights. Kat, thank you so much for joining us today. I'm super excited to have you here and just learn a little bit more about your career path, what you're doing now, but also a little bit more about the business and things like that.
Absolutely. Well, thank you so much for having me.
So you were a collegiate athlete. What sport did you participate in?
I played softball.
Softball. Nice. Okay.
So I was a catcher at Westchester University.
Really? That's awesome.
Yep.
Super cool. Okay.
It was a fun ride. I understand what athletes go through from going through it myself, and I wouldn't trade that experience for the world. It was awesome.
No, I'm sure they also value that, especially if do you work with girls softball?
Yes, I do.
Yeah. So that even makes it, well, you're probably like, hey, that's the first sport I want to pick and choose because that's what I know, right?
Yeah, I understand it.
What helped you make the transition to really want to become a sports dietitian or just become a dietitian in general? Where at any point in your collegiate career did you say, I want to be an RD?
So I always had like a general interest in just basically when individuals are feeling themselves similarly, why do they appear, perform, whatever, so different? And I'll give you the example of so I have two siblings. I have an older sister who's like a year and a half older than me, and then a younger brother who's 2 years younger than me. And we played all the same sports growing up. We were all swimmers. My sister and I both played softball. My brother played baseball, and my mom fed us the same dinners for like every night, right? So it was just curious to me why we all were like different levels of performance. We looked different, like all of the things, right? So that always, I remember that from even being like in grade school, my sister and I remember when my mom would give us a snack, I would eat mine super quickly. My sister would take like an hour to eat hers. And I was just like curious about that stuff. And then once I got into high school, I really started to try to figure out, okay, so I'm trying to go to college and play softball. So what are the things that are going to help me do that? And I found nutrition. I started looking stuff up. I started packing different things for lunch instead of buying lunch. So I was kind of like researching stuff on my own. And then when I got to college, started studying nutrition, and I was like, it would be so cool to work with athletes. And then my advisor at Westchester was Dr. Christine Karpinski, and the rest is history. So she brought me into the sports nutrition world, helped me to get connected with different people and just like understand what sports nutrition was. And there was like no turning back. I was like, this is what I want to do. This is exactly it. And I had the opportunity like my senior year to run a bit of a research project on my team actually with Dr. Karpinski. So that was really cool. And yeah, that once I found sports nutrition, I'm like, this is exactly what I want to do.
Yeah, it's always good to hear people's stories and just what led them there and why they choose certain things, because that's really, when you go to college, some people don't know, like I didn't know, and maybe you didn't know right away, but some people know right away. It's like, boom. And then others are like, they have to figure it out. So it's kind of cool to hear that path. Now you're in the collegiate setting and you do a great job with the work at Penn. And I'm sure there's a lot of challenges when it comes to student athletes and trying to figure out how do I solve this. How many student athletes y'all have at Penn?
We have 1,000, just shy of 1,000.
And
yeah.
Are you the only RD or do you have
No, it's just me.
Oh man. Like I remember at Tulane, we had 340 athletes. That's, and you're there, whatever, even if you're there part-time, you can still handle that a little bit easier. 1,000, there's no way one person can handle all that. So not only you have challenges, they have challenges. So what are some of the biggest challenges that student athletes face when it comes to fueling themselves properly?
I think there's a couple things here. So one, I think the biggest thing is time, just figuring out how to schedule things out or figuring out like what they actually need to be doing, how they need to balance their schedule. Being away from home for the first time is like so difficult for so many people. So that's number one. Number two is access to food. So in Philly, we have grocery stores, but like they're not super convenient to get to. And for the athletes, most of them don't have a car. So they're carrying their groceries. And so it's basically like another workout for them. So that's difficult too. And then as far as money, right? Like some athletes they're totally fine. Their parents are supporting them very graciously. And some athletes are on really strict budgets. And so that's difficult to navigate. And then the other thing is lack of knowledge. So I kind of referenced this in the beginning, like some athletes are coming from a high school where they had maybe a really great support staff who had a base knowledge of nutrition and gave them some tips and tools. Some athletes may have worked with dietitians or nutritionists. And then some athletes are coming in like completely blind. Like I have seriously had athletes, when I'm talking about carbohydrates, they're asking me like, what are carbohydrates? So they have like a very, very low level of knowledge. So it's super wide range of things, but I think those time, access to food, money, lack of knowledge are the biggest things that I see for athletes and trying to fuel properly.
And that's a lot. Like if you're 18 years old coming in, like you said, first with the lack of knowledge, that's always a red flag where you're like, all right, I got to attack that. But then maybe little money, maybe little access to food, and you don't have a lot of time, then that's a lot of stress, because I think a lot of the average person thinks they're a college student, they get access to everything and everything's free. And it's like, that's not the case. Like some of these kids really don't have the resources to eat enough in many cases. Those are very important. Thanks for sharing that. You emphasize it's important to simplify nutrition, right? You got to keep this stuff as basic as possible, especially for those that might not have a lot of knowledge. What are some examples and simple strategies that you recommend, like maybe emergency snacks or focusing on frequency over meal planning? What's your approach to that?
Yeah. So I think one of the hardest things of starting out as a dietitian is trying to take like these really complex things that we learn and dial it in to make it really simple and really user friendly. And that's something that like I'm super passionate about. And I think like Instagram, making handouts, even though that work can seem like really busy work, whatever it is, when you're an intern, like that's actually super helpful for allowing you to develop like your language, the way you communicate things, and make it just really practical. So with that being said, some things that I focus on with athletes are, number one, eating frequency over meal planning, like you mentioned. So when I'm working with an athlete, I don't even use the terminology meal plan. I think initially that just gives like a super like rigid, really structured, just not friendly approach, where I think fueling schedule, we're focusing on meal and snack timing and frequency, and that makes it feel so much easier. So talking to the athletes about, okay, maybe our initial goal, maybe you're only eating 2 times a day right now. Can we eat 3 times a day? Knowing that you really want to get them to maybe 4 or 5, but if they're only eating 2, they're not going to start eating 5. So trying to focus on meal frequency. Another huge thing to make athletes just more willing to carry out what you're asking them to do is getting them to get a lunchbox and ice packs. It seems like so simple, and they laugh at you when you say that because they don't want to be carrying around a lunchbox and ice packs. But like when you are an athlete and you're trying to accomplish things that most other college students are not trying to accomplish, you need to act differently. You need to keep things in mind that other individuals don't have to keep in mind. So that's like another huge one. Other things that I talk with athletes at Penn about specifically, we have a ton of different dining facilities. That's one really awesome thing about Penn. It's funny because when I was in college, we had like 3, maybe 2 dining facilities total. At Penn, they have a ridiculous amount, and they're like, there's not enough food. I'm like, okay, no, there's plenty of food. But with the dining facilities, there's a couple of options to do order ahead. So they can order before they get to one class, pick it up after another class, and maybe they don't eat it right away, but they're saving it for like 2 hours later when they actually need it. So that's been huge for a lot of our athletes. And then something that you mentioned that I love to talk to them about is emergency snacks. You should always have something in your backpack every single day. If you eat the snack, you need to replace it. So if you get caught talking to a professor in open hours, or you practice ran late and you have to run to class and you don't have time to go to a dining facility, like you at least have something. Maybe it's not perfect, but it's something.
I love that last option, because you're right. It's almost like you have to plan for the unplanned,
Right.
because like you said, you don't know what's going to happen. And the last thing these athletes want to do is be so underfueled, coming to practice, trying to study, finals, whatever. There's so many different variables. So I love that emergency snack option.
Yeah.
You kind of answered the next question, right? How do you balance providing individualized advice versus general tips versus, and I guess the diverse needs of collegiate athletes, 1,000 student athletes? I'm assuming your population is so diverse, you have to figure out, do you have some challenging situations, I guess, or what's your approach around that?
Yeah, well, first of all, you need to figure out what the low-hanging fruit is. And like, this is going to sound so basic, but for a lot of college athletes, it's eating breakfast. Like, that's a huge thing that we can focus on before we even go any further than that. I have athletes come in and they're asking about all of these crazy supplements that like, I really don't even have knowledge on. And then I'm like, okay, well, before we get to that, let's look at your nutrition. What are you doing right now? And it's like, okay, when's the first time that you're eating? And they're like, 1 o'clock. And you're like, whoa, what? okay, we need to back up like 20 steps. Like we're not even going to talk about these supplements. We need to focus on breakfast. So just figuring out like what the low hanging fruit is. And then when I'm working with such a large variety of athletes, and we have 33 teams at Penn, so we have so many different like types of cultures, both within the team, but then also within the sport as well. So like when I'm going to talk with a team, I have to have a good understanding of like what that team culture is before I go in and do it. So like maybe a coach is giving really bad nutrition advice, right? So you have to kind of tiptoe with what you're giving and not totally, go against what the coach maybe is saying. You want to do it politely, but get your, professionalism in there. Or maybe the team, like overall, we have some sports, and this is just not just at Penn, but in general, it's maybe embedded in the culture of, underfueling, eating disorders, stuff like that. And so again, you have to kind of figure out how you're going into that meeting. But with any of those scenarios that I just mentioned, maybe the focus is still pre-workout nutrition, but it's just a different way that you're delivering the information. So like maybe even you're using a very similar or the same handout that you've used for multiple teams or multiple talks. It's just the language that you're using to back up what you're trying to explain on the sheet is a little bit different.
Yeah, I mean, we get a lot of questions. What does a softball player need to eat different than a football player, or a basketball player versus volleyball, et cetera? I mean, calorie-wise, probably so based on output, right? But I think people are looking for, I need something customized for this sport. And as you know, there's only certain sports that probably are a little bit unique, like the wrestlings of the world and the weight cutting sports, but sports nutrition is still sports nutrition. The next topic we're going to dive into, we're going to shift a little bit into time management. You mentioned actually time is one of the biggest challenges, and time management nutrition for student athletes is a big issue. When you look at academics, training, competitions, how do you help the athletes kind of integrate nutrition into those busy schedules?
So I like the athletes to try to think about like in their day-to-day schedule, if they have it in like a Google Calendar or an Outlook calendar or whatever. So they have the blocks of time. So classes, practice, whatever it is, they have these blocks, right? But then within those blocks or in between those blocks are going to be spaces. And any of those spaces should be filled with a time that they're eating a meal or a snack. That's like the perfect opportunity to be able to do those things. So kind of thinking about, again, like a fueling schedule versus just a meal plan. Like when are we able to eat based off of what our schedule currently looks like? For maybe some non-athletes, they can base their day around when their meals are. But for student athletes, like that's just not possible. They have to base their eating around what their class schedule and what their practice schedule looks like. So helping them to kind of like visualize that and know if they have 2 hours in the middle of the day, like they should be taking advantage of that and getting in a meal or snack at that time. And then also just figuring out like when they're actually going to get food. So grocery shopping on off days, or because at Penn, like I said, a lot of the athletes don't have cars being in a city. So maybe somebody's parent has a Costco membership and they can do an Instacart order, right? And they can split it amongst their house or amongst whoever they live with. That could be a really easy way, or using just Instacart to one of the other grocery stores, but making sure that that's like accounted for in their week. So again, if Sunday's an off day, like that's one of the things you should be doing on Sunday is preparing so that you actually have the food for the week.
Have you ever advised a student athlete to maybe set reminders on their phone, or like an alarm, like, hey, time to eat?
Yeah. And I think for some individuals, super helpful. And I think for others, just turn it off and they're like, whatever.
Right. It's like the wake up alarm. Like, I'm tired of hearing that.
Right.
Now, you mentioned earlier, you talked about students, hey, pack some snacks, put something in your bag in the event that you just don't have the ability. What are some roles that snacks play? But more importantly, what are some of those portable options that you recommend to support those athletes that are always on the go?
Yeah. So snacks, looking at that as a way to just keep energy up and help continue the muscle growth and repair process. So snacks, like I think a lot of times they could be just like, when we think of a snack, maybe we just think of like a bag of goldfish, and like we know that that's not going to be the most optimal snack for an athlete. Like it really should almost like reflect a mini meal, but maybe just with different food options. So when I'm talking with athletes about having a snack, in most cases, they should be having a protein source and a carb and or fat source. So maybe some things that would meet those categories is like beef jerky and a piece of fruit. Maybe it's a go-go squeeze or two and a protein bar at that time. Maybe it's a protein shake and a piece of fruit. Maybe it's a peanut butter and jelly sandwich. They're using a lunchbox with ice packs. We now have greater ability to bring different things. Like maybe we're bringing Greek yogurt and granola. Maybe we bring overnight oats. string cheese, things like that. Like, that's why I'm so big on the lunchbox and ice packs, because it just allows us to bring such a larger variety of options. And like, for me being a foodie, like that just makes sense to me. I want different options. I don't want to eat the same thing every day. So I think athletes should really kind of, grasp onto that. Like, they can just have more variety if they have the ability to keep it cold.
Yeah. When you hear it, it's so funny because when you say lunchbox, I just envisioned my grammar school. I had like my little He-Man and little cartoons and any figures I used to love. And they're probably like, you want me to bring a what? But now kids have really like nice, sophisticated, like my daughter's 13 and she's like, Dad, look at my new lunchbox. It's just a black bag that's insulated. I'm like, she's excited about that. But I'm like, okay, cool.
Let her be excited about it. That's awesome.
It is. I am. I'm like, and she loves bringing her food to school and, she tries to avoid the school lunch and things like that. So it's like club volleyball player, it's kind of fun that she's going to get involved. All right.
That's
Stay
awesome.
with us as we take a short break to thank our sponsors. You're listening to the Eat to Win podcast with your host, Tavis Piatoli. Liquid Fuel is a new sports and hydration product formulated by a sports dietitian to give athletes the edge to train and compete longer. It contains the low glycemic carbohydrate platinose, designed to keep blood sugar levels more stable to provide energy for 3 to 4 hours without the blood sugar crash seen in other leading sports drinks. Its unique 4-part electrolyte formula includes 50% of your daily magnesium need to optimize muscle function. Liquid Fuel is naturally sweetened, along with no artificial ingredients or colors. Currently being used by high school, collegiate, and professional teams, Liquid Fuel allows you to live life with the confidence knowing you're properly fueling your body. Visit drinkliquidfuel.com and use the code MSD10 to get 10% off your offer. All right, welcome back to the Eat to Win podcast. We're here talking with Kat Hammer, Director of Sports Nutrition at Penn University. She's also talking about simplifying sports nutrition for collegiate athletes. So let's dive right back in. All right. Balancing academics, athletics, and health. That's always a big topic because you had an Ivy League school like Penn. That's just a big thing. And these students probably have a pretty rigorous academic schedule. Ivy League athletes often face unique pressures. Really, any student athlete does, but particularly I'm sure there's a little bit more pressure for those to be incredibly successful. How do you help them balance academics, athletics, and overall health?
Yeah, this is a tough one, and it's going to be like so incredibly individualized. But I think number one, so health is the number one thing that they need to focus on. A lot of times they're just so focused on making sure they're doing well in classes and doing well at practice, but like they can't do either of those things as well as they want to if they're not just generally healthy. And like, I think that starts with getting enough sleep. So crazy, because I'm somebody who, if I don't get at least 7 hours, like I feel it. Like I just do not do well on a short amount of sleep. And some of our athletes, like they're sleeping like 3 to 4 hours, like a lot of the time, which is just like crazy. And they say that it's from school, and it's not that I don't believe them, but trying to figure out, are there ways that we can rework your schedule to get you better sleep, number one, before we even like talk about nutrition. And then once we like can start talking about nutrition, it's like kind of going back to what we were saying before, like some of them might only be eating 2 times a day, and like eating 2 times a day as an athlete, it's probably not safe to say that they're going to get enough total calories just eating twice a day. So like, what if we just figure out how you start eating 3 times a day and really start there? And maybe like they don't ever get in one semester up to 100% of their total calorie needs. Yeah, that's not great, but like maybe we get way better at getting closer to our calorie needs than we were in the beginning of the semester. So like, I know a lot of dietitians, including myself, can shade towards the side of being a perfectionist and like just wanting to get to the end point, right? But with a lot of college athletes in particular, like we're never going to get to that point. So like, how can we just get better than we were before? And so focusing on those small things, focusing on like overall health, talking to them about maybe cognitive function when you don't have enough nutrients, like that could be really helpful for them to hear. Figuring out how we just focus on number one, overall health first, is the most important thing in my opinion.
You make a great point because like you said, if the calorie intake's insufficient, they're not sleeping a lot, that's just another cascade for even more stress. And then on training on top of that, it's like, and then their mind's probably like, how do I study? It's like, oh, that's got to be just, I don't envy, I envy those students sometimes, but then you don't, because people don't understand there's a lot more stress than just performing on the field.
Absolutely.
Now, I know you're not a mental health specialist. That's not what you do, but you're going to deal with that because nutrition can play a role there. What are some of the mental and emotional barriers that you see student athletes face when it comes to nutrition, and how do you help them kind of overcome those?
I think like number one that comes to mind is body image, right? Like this is such a huge thing. And I'll even say when I was a college athlete, like I dealt with a lot of things too. I would definitely consider myself as having disordered eating. I was always striving to be smaller. And I like to use this story just to kind of give an example. So I played softball. I was a catcher. I was a power hitter. I was used to be powerful. So if I was the smallest version of myself, I wasn't getting everything out of myself that I was given a scholarship to do, right? So my senior year, I ended up losing like 20 pounds throughout the year. And it's really interesting when you look back at it because my power numbers went down. And maybe I like felt good, or I told myself I felt good, but it never showed in sport the way that I wanted it to. And that's something when I look back on it now, it's like super frustrating because I spent so much time trying to make myself smaller and it was taking away from what I was supposed to be doing. And so when I'm working with athletes and I see them kind of going in this direction, trying to help them understand like, what is your purpose on this team? And in like, just like as a person, right? Like, is it to be the smallest version of yourself? No, it's to be able to go through life and be healthy and then contribute in a very meaningful way to your team. So trying to help athletes kind of understand that fueling yourself appropriately is what we should be doing, is how we get to the best version and the best athlete. So I think that's like the number one thing that I see as far as emotional and mental barriers to just being the best athlete that you can be. And unfortunately, this is far too common. It's so embedded in like literally everything in our culture, TikTok, social media, everything. And even like, unfortunately, like coach language, right? Like sometimes we're facing coaches, maybe athletic trainers, maybe support staff that are just giving really contradictory messaging, intentionally or unintentionally. And those things, when you have an individual who has, superiority over you, like you're going to take to heart what they're saying. And that I know I experienced the same thing, whether it's a joke or not, it's impactful.
Yeah. Words are very impactful. We're seeing some of that with daughter's volleyball team, and just kids are getting coached very tough, in a very tough way. And I think nowadays, back then, you and I growing up and me growing up in the 80s, we were coached very hard. And when I played high school football, you got hit over the head if you did something wrong with the clipboard. Thankfully, there's a helmet on, so you're not worried about that. But now it's like, I think there's a different, level of student athlete, especially at the young level, that they might not know how to handle some of these things. And granted, I'm not saying everything that's being said is the right thing that, to coach athletes, but yeah, it's tough. I'm glad you mentioned that, and nutrition plays a big role. Long-term health. In a lot of these student athletes, we have to think life after sport, because for many of them, there's no after college for them. There'll be a small percentage, as you know, that will play at the professional level. What's your focus when you educate student athletes about building sustainable habits that's really to take them, for the rest of their life? They move into their career. What's your approach there?
Number one, helping them to understand like what the function of certain nutrients are. Like carbohydrates are going to give you energy. Protein is going to help with not only muscle growth, but like so many different things, right? And so maybe not just focusing on what the initial or what the most important like sports performance benefit is, but what like the overall health benefit is as well. Really comes into play when we're talking about vitamins and minerals and stuff like that. So I think that's really important to include. There's something else I was going to say on that. Maybe I'm going to lose my train of thought now, but I think just giving them an understanding of like, we're not just focused on your sports performance. We are focused on your overall health. We need to kind of keep that in mind.
When you think about student athletes that are listening, young student athletes, high school student athletes that might be sitting here going, maybe I want to be a dietitian, but I also want to play at the collegiate level. What's one piece of advice you would give them to start making better nutrition choices today?
If they're not eating breakfast, start eating breakfast.
That's it. Love it, because 40% of high school kids don't even eat breakfast.
I know. I work with a lot of high school athletes in my private practice, and it's just like, it's crazy. You can almost like guess that they're not eating breakfast. So that's number one. And number two, I would say maybe like the next thing is trying to eat 3 meals a day. If they're not already eating 3 meals a day, that's the next best step. And then maybe focusing on snacks before we even get to really talking about like the specific nutrient timing and like get your high carb pre-workout snack in and stuff like that. Like the things that sound exciting are the things that are second to the basics and the foundation. So again, if you're not getting breakfast or you're not eating 3 meals, like I wouldn't even go any further than that.
Yeah. So those listening, take Kat's advice. It's going to work. Just think about fueling your body. Think about where you can get just a little bit better. As Kat mentioned earlier, she's like, just get a little bit better. If you're not eating breakfast, just start eating something for breakfast to get your body in that habit, because it's going to make a world of a difference. A couple of more questions as we kind of get close to the end. For the audience listening, what's one takeaway that you'd like for them to remember about how do you fuel the student athlete for success? What's really, you mentioned breakfast, but how do we just fuel for success overall?
Increasing just knowledge around nutrition. So how do we just create a balanced plate? How do we create a balanced snack, right? These things can seem, again, basic, foundational, but if for dinner you're just having pasta and there's no protein with it, we're not doing everything that we can be doing. So increasing knowledge. And I think this just like, I wish I could impact not only athletes, but individuals from a much younger age, because I just don't think, I know for myself, I was never educated on this when I was in school. Yeah, we have like the food pyramid, but that's like a 5-minute talk.
So ancient.
Yeah. And so food pyramid, or like the plate that they've come out with now, and all of those things, like, yeah, that's, I guess, an introduction, but not a meaningful introduction, in my opinion. So I wish we could educate earlier. And I would say, like, for people listening, if you're a high school athlete and you really do want to play at the next level, start investing in your nutrition. Like, it's going to be so incredibly impactful for your knowledge and health before we even get to performance. Like, yeah, it's going to help with performance, but like the things that we keep talking about, it's going to help overall health first.
I love that word invest. I mean, it's so important because you think about it from financial. People are really, they love to invest their money, and it's the long-term return, right? It's that long return. Same thing. I love that word invest, because you invest now, student athletes. This is the number one piece of that puzzle. If you put nutrition first, everything falls into place. If nutrition is a mess, everything underneath it, performance, recovery, body comp, just doesn't really reach those goals. So I love that word. All right.
Yeah. And one thing to add, can I just add one thing to that?
Yes, please. Go ahead.
It's very interesting to see when athletes come into college. We were talking earlier about like some athletes come in and they have no nutrition knowledge at all. Like I've said, I had athletes ask me what a carbohydrate is. And for those athletes, they're really not able to get a sense of their nutrition, at least until like their junior year, right? Like freshman and sophomore year is a figuring it out time for them. And then junior year, maybe they start to get it, but maybe they never get it because they never had that knowledge and they just learn how to do it, halfway, versus individuals who come in and they're like, oh, I've worked with a dietitian before and I have questions on more specific things. They're already trying to optimize their nutrition, right? There's a difference between working on your nutrition and optimizing your nutrition. And I want everyone to get to the point where we're optimizing nutrition. And that's when we can start talking about supplements and the cool things and stuff like that. But like, if we don't have that baseline knowledge, we're really at a deficit. So if you can gain that knowledge even before you get to college, if that's your goal, I would highly advise that.
I love what you said earlier too. This is something we can't be perfect in, but I see so many people trying to chase numbers and trying to be perfect with their diet. Like it doesn't even exist. There's not even a reality around perfect diet. Tracking, weighing food, trying to hit macros. It's like you said earlier, just eat and try to have a plan and have good balance. I love it. Let's learn about Hammer Fuel Sports Nutrition. I want to know a little bit about your private practice. Tell us about that, what you're doing, who you're working with. Obviously no names, but just like type of athletes and individuals. Let's learn about that.
Yeah. So I started my practice right after I finished my internship and took my RD exam, because I took my RD exam in 2020. So it was right after COVID hit and there were no jobs. It was so frustrating, such a frustrating time to finish my internship. And so when I was training in college, I was working with a sports performance facility or working out there. I also interned as a strength and conditioning intern. And then they asked if I wanted to do some like nutrition consulting for them. So I started doing that, and it kind of just grew into, okay, I should probably like just name this something and create a business. And so while I was job searching after my internship, I just started taking on clients, mostly high school athletes. And just over the years, I've continued to build it. When I first started at Penn, I was only part-time. So I was doing part-time my business, part-time as a college sports dietitian, and working again with a lot of high school athletes, college and then professional athletes. And where I'm at right now with the business is continuing to do that on the side. I would say a majority of my clients are either college or high school athletes. And I'm really starting to focus on getting out into certain high schools and doing presentations for different organizations and things like that. And I feel like that right now, that's where my passion lies, and going out into the community or doing some different virtual presentations as well. I really love talking to bigger groups. I love the one-on-one stuff too, but I like the ability to reach more individuals by doing the group presentations. I think that's really fun for me. And I have some high schools who I do a progressed curriculum with, because it's great if we give the baseline knowledge of what the nutrients are, how we should be balancing them, that type of thing. But when we can progress that knowledge and through different seasons. So I'm working with one high school, their baseball team right now. I already gave the initial presentation, just an overview of what are the nutrients, how should we be balancing them, stuff like that. I'm going to give another presentation next month, and then one more right before their season starts, so we can really build their nutrition and not just continue to talk about you need carbs, you need protein, whatever. It's no, why do we need these things? How do we do these things? And all of that. So that's really what I'm most passionate about right now with my business.
Website, email address, we're going to put that in the show notes for people to see.
Yes, website. And I post a lot on Instagram, really trying to do simple takeaways for athletes. I'm not there putting on all these really in-depth recommendations. It's okay, here are options for breakfast, or here are pre-workout options and stuff like that. And so I just try to do my best with continuing to get information out.
Awesome. Okay, we'll have all that information. Visit Kat's website. That'll be listed in the show notes for you guys to have. Kat, this was awesome. Now, you're not ready to go yet, because there's a question that you don't realize I'm about to ask you, and it has nothing to do with today's topic, right? So it's not nutrition related, strictly fun, strictly because I want to be a little selfish and ask something about my true love is music. And I ask all my guests this. I've always asked the guests this one question. We won't do three. We call it my little curveball round. But the question is, if you could be the lead singer of any music group, band, or anything, who would that be? I may ask you a second question, but that's just it. That's the really first question.
I feel, oh, this is such a hard question. I feel like a lead singer of a country band would be so cool. It's so American and so it just would be so cool, I think.
Yeah. No, look, I have a love, I'm a Pearl Jam junkie. So, and I used to sing in a 90s alternative cover band many years ago before my daughter was born. So it was always if I could be the lead singer of any band and somebody hey, he's no longer, I would audition for that. That's just me. But
that's so cool.
Some people are this is who it is. And others are it's a tough question. It really is. I will throw in one more. This is a little, and you're kind of, I'd say newer in the career, but still, I like to ask this question. If Kat now can go back to, let's say, freshman Kat in college, what would you tell your younger self?
Well, this is a good one, and I already have an answer for it. One of the hardest lessons for me throughout college and into my career, and I learned this very, very quickly when I started the career, is not everybody has the same background, perspective, opinions, ideas as you. And as a dietitian, it's very, very, very important to spend that first initial few minutes, maybe even the entire first session, trying to understand the background of the individual, what makes them tick, their daily lives, all of those things. Because if you don't understand that, you can't help that individual effectively. If they don't have, I don't know, a grocery store within 20 minutes, it's not easy for them to just go to the grocery store on the way home from the gym or something like that, right? So you really have to understand what their background is, what their just different perspectives are before you can effectively help that individual.
Love it. Thank you so much. That's great. No more questions, no more secret little questions. I just like to kind of keep people on their toes. So really appreciate your time today. Just a phenomenal amount of information. And be sure, everyone, to visit Kat's website. Kat, we'll hope to have you back on in the near future as well.
I would love that. Thank you so much.
That's it for today's episode of the Eat to Win podcast. A huge thank you to Kat Hammer for sharing her expertise on simplifying nutrition for the collegiate athlete. If you enjoyed today's episode, be sure to like, subscribe, and share with your community. Until next time, keep on winning.
Thanks for joining us on the Eat to Win show. Remember, every meal is a step toward victory. Until next time, stay strong and keep winning.